Hello everyone, Sarah Lopez, founder of We Belong PDX here. The last video I shared was all about our founding story, what kind of was behind the programming elements, right? The heart behind the founding. And this is more about the paperwork, right? The must-dos to get that golden 501c3 ticket. And so I'll go through that here. But going back to the story, going to fall of 2020, we really were able to begin more organized programming. And that included, onboarding volunteers and whatnot. And we did that, before we even filed anything. And I, at that point, then in October of 2020, made the decision, okay, going to start a nonprofit. Here we go, right? And reached out to a friend who had experience with this, and they kind of gave me a list of, okay, next steps. And so the first thing that I did was gather a board of directors, and I will actually talk more about board development and what I've learned there in another video. But just starting there, I gathered a board of directors, people that I knew or people that I knew somebody who could vouch for, where, they would really have heart in the work that we were doing. Definitely went real program heavy, and I'll talk about that in the board directors video too, and just kind of what I learned about that. But that was the first thing that I did. And then number two, filed for articles of incorporation with the state, and just paid like $50. You include the board of directors, list out, and at that point, I'm a voting board member as well on there, and put myself as president of the on that paperwork for the Articles of Inc. And then I found some bylaws online that were from a nonprofit, did similar work as us, and I essentially read through those really thoroughly and made any necessary changes that were applicable to what we were doing and the details of that, and had somebody else review it as well who obviously knew more about that and had experience, somebody who actually had legal experience with nonprofits. So I had it reviewed, and then we voted on these bylaws to actually officially adopt them as our bylaws. So adopted the bylaws. And then I began my journey of actually not being certain about what I was embarking on. And I will say this is what is really different. And this is why I say everybody has their own journey, and it's really important. And, I do believe there was a reason, and that this was just part of the journey. But I really let fear take over, and I suddenly decided, having a better understanding of what it meant to start a nonprofit, I suddenly decided, now was not the right time. I'm going to just let this process go slow, and down the road, I'm going to look for another, full-time job that I can really start doing. And then, down the road, I'll really invest in the nonprofit, because really it just, once I realized what it meant, it was scary to think of giving my life to that, because I realized it would really I'd have to sacrifice my life for a few years, and that was hard to admit at that point, at that stage in my life. And so I, ended up waiting quite a long time before submitting the 1023, and that was really because of my wavering. So then once I finally was like, okay, no, we're gonna do this, I found a lawyer who was willing to do pro bono. He was, new to his position and needed experience with a 1023 form. And so he helped in the process of just making sure everything looked good there, and just legal, overview of that form. And then we officially submitted the 1023 form in November of 2021. So for a year after we filed for Articles of Incorporation, which is not common. Typically, you want to file your, submit the 1023 pretty much the same time that you file the Articles of Inc. And really that was just due to me letting fear win for a period of time. But again, everyone has their own journey in that. And so we submitted that 1023, and then at the same time, we also filed with the Department of Justice. So every state has their own Department of Justice, and we had not yet filed with the Department of Justice in Oregon. So we actually did both of those at the same time. The lawyer helped me take care of the Department of Justice part. And so then we received our 501c3 status actually pretty quickly compared to other nonprofits that I've heard about. It was in March of 2022 that we actually were given that status. And in April of 2022, the letter was received that said that we had been given that status, that golden ticket. And that is when I began to make it work for me to be a full-time gig. And at that point, I'd already been spending many hours running programming and running the nonprofit. We just didn't have the status yet. And I actually had an incredible community that individually supported me, right, without even getting that tax exempt status, which was incredibly gracious. And then I was also working lots of little side gigs, which is really common for nonprofit leaders to do for a while. And so that was the paperwork piece of starting the nonprofit. And I hope it's helpful. And again, every journey is a little bit different.